Hello, welcome to Canada Files. I'm Valerie Pringle. Howard Shore is an Oscar and Grammy award-winning composer and conductor. He was a musician in the band Lighthouse. He was the first musical director of Saturday Night Live, but he's best known for his film scores, of which there are more than 80, including the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's been a remarkable musical career. Howard Shore, hello.
Hello.
Can we start at the beginning? I mean, there's such a lovely arc to your career, but I love the story of you as a kid taking an aptitude test, and your score in music was so high that they gave you an instrument.
Yes. Well, when I was a youngster, I sang in the choir at school when I was 8. And this is going back to the early 50s. Around 54, the Seashore test was a national test given to all the grade school kids for music aptitude. And it tested rhythm and pitch. They were looking for children who might show music ability and offered them instruments. And I was interested in jazz, and so the clarinet was my instrument of choice.
Man, did they ever find the right person with musical aptitude? They should still be doing that. I mean, what a great thing for the government to be doing.
Yeah, it's called the Seashore test. It was a computer generated test for all grade school. The clarinet took me to a private teacher who his name was Morris Weinswag. And he gave me lessons every week. And Morris thought it would be a good idea to also have me learn counterpoint and harmony.
As a kid?
Yeah, I was about 9 and 10 years old.
And you got it, though, which is remarkable.
So he started me writing with a pencil and a pen, and I was doing counterpoint and harmony exercises every week.
Which you still are doing 70 years later, scratching away.
Still doing the same thing, yeah. So that led me to playing the clarinet, and led me to the saxophone and my love of jazz. And then I played in a lot of small groups, jazz groups in Toronto and the Village, and we started playing around a little bit. And then it takes me into Berkeley.
So you studied music at Berkeley and learned all kinds of things like composition and choral music. I mean, you had a great curiosity about music. You were a total music nerd, basically.
Yeah, I had some good teachers, and then that experience in school kind of led me to Lighthouse.
Which was the Canadian kind of fusion band known as, I guess, what, the Canadian Chicago.
Right, like Lighthouse was a Canadian band, exactly, and there was a horn section and a string quartet, electronic strings, and I did 8 albums with Lighthouse between between 69 and 72.
So Lighthouse was a great experience.
It was. I mean, it took me around the world traveling, and I played 1,000 one-nighters with in 4 years. We used to play like 250 gigs a year. It taught me about collaborating, and it taught me about playing in a band and doing lots of arrangements. We played with orchestras. We wrote a ballet. That was filmed at CBC. And while I was in Lighthouse, I was also working with Lorne Michaels, and we were doing radio and television shows.
Okay, just back to Lighthouse for a sec. I'm told Duke Ellington introduced you.
Right, at the Rock
Must have been your hero of jazz, Duke Ellington.
He did. He was playing in Toronto, and our manager convinced him. He was on his way to the airport, convinced him to stop at the Rock Pile, the Masonic Temple on Davenport, to introduce this new rock band sensation kind of thing. So he did it. He just stopped in and...
Well, you must have been gobsmacked just to meet him.
Yeah, of course, it was fantastic.
And also with Lighthouse and all those, years of touring, you opened closed for Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin,
Yes.
Grateful Dead. And Elton John opened for you. I mean, did you think this guy's good?
I thought he was incredible, and we had some groups open for us that were amazing, like John McLaughlin, and they were all just being discovered. So it was an amazing time.
So back to Lorne Michaels, who was your camp friend.
I met Lorne in Haliburton, Ontario, at a camp called Timberland, and he was also a neighborhood kid that I knew from around the area that I lived in, Toronto. And we did plays at camp. We did a lot of musicals. We did sketches. We did a lot of improv. It was kind of like an early version of Saturday Night Live. And we went on to do radio and television at CBC once camp was finished.
Ben, you were the musical director of Saturday Night Live, the first one, and it was 5 years of your life doing those crazy shows live out of New York.
Yes.
On Saturday night.
Yes. Well, I had a lot of experience of performing. I mean, I'd been on the road for years. I did all these concerts with Lighthouse and was traveling around playing rock festivals in England, and we toured in Japan. We were in all over the States and Canada. So I got to see a lot of performance and absorb that. So doing a live show on television, Saturday Night Live, felt pretty natural at the time.
Yeah, but it must have been crazy.
Well, I handpicked the musicians from my record collection because I didn't know the New York, I knew the jazz scene all from my record collection. So I just went through the back of my records and called people up that I liked from the recordings.
And working with Lorne, what was that relationship,
Terrific.
collaboration?
Yeah, it's always been terrific. We've been friends for years. I mean, we're very dear, close friends, like brothers.
And you came up with the name the Blues Brothers for Aykroyd and Belushi?
Well, I did, apparently. It was, we did a warm-up. For television, you do a warm-up, and the house band would do a warm-up, and then Dan Aykroyd, who played some blues harp, wanted to be in the, join in the warm-up. And of course, and we were playing a lot of blues and R&B, and so Danny fit right in. And then John Belushi saw that, and he wanted to be part of it. So could he do a few songs with us in the warm-up? And I would introduce them as those brothers in blues, the Blues Brothers. It just came out one night.
Oh, sweet line. But is it a blur that time to you because it was so intense?
No, it's very distinct. I remember, yeah, great recollection of all of it. It seems like a long time ago, and I guess it was. I mean, it's been, the show years that I did were 75 to 80. And, but it's a precious time in my life.
Yeah, sweet memories.
Yeah.
And then you started doing more composition and film scores. That began around that time?
The years that I did the show in the summer would always be hiatus in television. And so I started to work in the summer with David Cronenberg. I approached him. I knew his movies, but I didn't know if he would take me on as a composer. He had never worked with a composer. And I managed to talk to him and speak to him and say that I'd only done one film before that, before The Brood. And in the summer, I worked with David and did films like The Brood, Scanners, and Videodrome while I was still working on Saturday Night Live.
Wow. And what sort of skill set then did you start to tap into to do film scores?
Well, it was kind of using everything I had learned and wanted to try in the studio. I was interested in the technology, and I wanted to be in the recording studio. And I thought film music in particular, was a good way to connect to the recording studio, connect to other musicians, and be able to write a variety of different things and experiment with things that I was interested in. So scores like Scanners and the Videodrome were done in 79 and 80 were very experimental. But that's where I was kind of heading. I wanted to try things, and I thought film was a way to use the technology.
But you also have to help tell the story, not get in the way, enhance the characters.
Right. That kind of came later. In the early films I did, especially with David Cronenberg, we worked a lot in the subtext of the story. We didn't really try to indicate to the audience,
Something bad's going to happen.
Yeah, we did.
There are a lot of scary movies that David Cronenberg made.
We did. I know, but we never really took that route. We kind of tried different ways of using music in film, and I found that very interesting. David was very open to experiment, and we've done 16 films together. And I don't think any of them kind of repeat. They've always tried something new each go.
And then you started working with different directors, Martin Scorsese.
Well, in 1986, I did 3 films, After Hours with Martin Scorsese, Penny Marshall's Big, and David Cronenberg's The Fly. They were all successful films.
And so different.
And so different. And so that kind of opened the door to Hollywood and to a lot of other, offers that started to, people were interested in my work. And I was thrilled. And so I thought, oh, well, I'll try all the, that was a comedy, a kind of an independent kind of mystery, After Hours, and a sci-fi thriller. So it was like a perfect beginning for film music.
Well, and then Silence of the Lambs, and how did you figure out that music?
Yeah, Silence of the Lambs was a Jonathan Demme movie with Jodie Foster, and that was in 1990. So by the time I did Silence of the Lambs, I had been working in film for about 10 years, maybe even a little over 10 years. So I had some experience. I wrote it for orchestra. It's written for the Munich Symphony. And it felt pretty natural. I mean, I like to read. So I studied the book. I got into the subtext, the characters, the underlying story. Jonathan kind of moved me to understand Clarice's character much better, and to highlight what she was,
rather than Hannibal.
Well, yeah, exactly. Film music is about point of view. And so with the scenes with Clarice, the music takes her point of view. It's empathetic, which was unusual for that kind of film. Generally, it would be the bigger character, the Hannibal character, as you mentioned, would take the focus of the music. But we didn't do that. And I think it created something unique in that film.
Mm-hmm. And so many of them I'm looking, M. Butterfly, Philadelphia, Seven, Mrs. Doubtfire.
Yes, great film. Again, I was being offered a lot of different projects, and they seemed exciting at the time. I mean, Mrs. Doubtfire was a fantastic film, and Robin Williams' performance was remarkable. And I guess my experience of working in comedy kind of made me, Chris Columbus directed it, maybe made him feel I might have been right for that.
Were you involved ever on set, or did you just sort of, get involved as you were sent pictures, or at what stage did you start figuring out how things should sound?
I don't like to go to the set too often. I didn't like to look behind the curtain. It keeps the magic alive as long as I could. And that's why I'd also study the novels and the scripts that were written, because I like to absorb the material without the visual for quite a while. I like to take in the ideas and work with the ideas first. But then when I saw the film, it had so much rhythm to it. Robin did so much improvisation that I had to then actually follow with the orchestra. So it was challenge, sure, yeah.
Does it bother you that people forget music from movies? They leave the theater and they'd go, oh yeah, what'd you write? What does it sound like? And you think, I worked for years on those things.
Well, film is a total experience. You want to balance all the different parts of the film, the cinematography, the editing, the acting, the music, costumes, production design, direction. They should all balance, and then just transport the viewer to the world, whatever the world is, whether it's Silence of the Lambs or Fellowship of the Ring. It takes you to that world, and you want to just live in that world. That's a successful film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What stands out for you? Any from pre-Lord of the Rings, which is where we're going,
Yeah.
pre-Lord of the Rings, anything that you think, oh, that was perfect, that was lovely, I nailed it?
I never think I nailed it, no. And it's hard to go back and watch, some of the old films and seeing the choices that you make. I think that's quite common with a lot of people making films. But when I do catch something, I'm okay. I mean, I feel like some projects felt more natural to how I, because the music I'm writing is only coming from my heart. If I'm feeling something, music is an emotional language. I have to feel something to write it. And if I do that, if the emotion's right, and then I can do the composition. And then when I watch it later, as we're talking about, it feels natural. Like something like Silence of the Lambs feels natural to me now when I watch it. Oh, of course. Yeah.
So probably your greatest work was Lord of the Rings trilogy, Hobbit, Oscar winning. Probably one of the best musical scores ever is how it's described. Are you just enormously proud of that?
Well, yes, I am, of course, yes. It's really, the Lord of the Rings was kind of a culmination of everything I learned and knew about theater, film, novels, poetry, music. It was everything. And I had a great subject to work with. And I had a great connection to Tolkien through nature and how I live. And it was like a gift, really. It came to me. I was in my sort of late 50s, so I had the energy and everything. I could orchestrate, I could conduct, I could produce, I could do all those things, and I kept it very close. Didn't let a lot of people in. Tried to do as much as I could from one pen.
And a great connection with the director, Peter Jackson, even though you were here in New York and he was in New Zealand.
He was 9,000 miles away, and I was able to communicate with him through traveling there, through the phone, through an early version of the internet. I was able to work with him. It was successful, and we connected.
And you ended up writing a song with Fran Walsh and Annie Lennox, Into the
Right.
West, which won an Oscar.
Right.
I mean, Annie Lennox is such a pistol. That must have
Isn't
been
she
a blast.
amazing? Yeah, it was a joy to work with her. I was looking for the end of Return of the King, and I thought Annie, she was so stately. She represented Galadriel so well to me, and I wrote it in that Galadriel type of posture that Annie has, that stature, and so it was wonderful to be able to work with her. She was great at the Oscars too. I thought she sang it so beautifully.
Well, how cool to win them. 3 Oscars you've won, 4 Grammys.
Yes. Well, the accolades have been amazing, and I wasn't really too conscious of the whole system.
Because you were just working away for 4 years.
I was just working away. I was just this guy in a room, with his pen and his pencil.
But the response was, but you must have known, though, that this is beautiful.
We did for a while, There were some difficult years there too. With 9/11 was a Fellowship of the Ring, and there was some hard times making those films. So, but they offered so much to me, both emotionally and musically, what I could do, what I could accomplish, the choirs, the boys' choir I could work with. It was really fantastic to be able to create that piece and then to receive that type of accolade for it was unbelievable.
And you talk about being inspired by nature,
Yeah.
just generally in your work, but certainly for that, that line of everything that's green and good.
Yes, exactly. I live in a forest, in an oak wood, and I found that my connection to Tolkien was through nature. And even going back to Halliburton and how I grew up, every summer was Northern Ontario, canoe trips and camping. And so I had a strong connection, and I think that's helped me interpret his work.
So you're still working away, as you've been since you were a kid, learning to scratch notes on a paper, disciplined.
I do. I learned to write counterpoint and harmony that way. So all the scores, all the Ring scores I did that way. It's, I don't know, maybe 12 hours of music, but it didn't feel like a day unless notes were going down on paper. And I'm very disciplined, I'm very organized, and so I would write, 50 bars of music a day. And it just totals up, it just adds up. And before you know it, you have your 12 hours.
No, it's astonishing. What's, in that brain of yours?
Well, it's just a day-to-day process. Don't think so much ahead. Like when I would write each day, I would just write one bar at a time. You can only write one bar at a time. So I would just linearly just write my way through the project.
And you continue with concertos, you've written opera. It's part of who you are.
Yeah. I like to try different things. Like the opera was, for me, an experiment. I wanted to try it.
That was The Fly.
The Fly, yes. It was, it premiered at the Châtelet in Paris, which was fantastic to be in Paris and to be having an opera premiere. And then it went to LA and played at LA Opera. And the concertos and the chamber pieces are just part of my work. They're just things, some of them I've been asked to write. The piano concerto was written for Long Long. The recent guitar concerto for Milos, they're incredible artists. And when they come to you and ask you to write something for them, you just do it because music is just a part of my life. It's allowed me to be creative. It's a very emotional part of my world, being able to write music for great artists and to work with great soloists. It's just, it's like, breathing great air.
Well, it's been quite a life.
Thank you.
That aptitude test sure was right.
He must have some aptitude for music. It seemed okay.
Wow, no, what a brilliant path it set you on. And when you took that test, did you go, yeah, that's right? Or would you have been a musician anyway?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really know. I was just a youngster. I was probably about 8 years old. And you're filling out a carbon computer form, how many notes in this sequence, that kind of thing, But something led me to music. And I wasn't great at a lot of other things. So I think other people say that as well, Music just sort of takes you over and away you go.
We ask all our guests at the end of this show what being Canadian means to them.
Well, to me, I connect a lot with nature. I think growing up in Canada, I spent all those summers in Halliburton, and then I spent summers in Muskoka. So the Canadian, to me, always felt like a part of nature. When I come back to Canada, I always feel grounded. And where I live in New York, this is probably as close to Muskoka as you can find in upstate New York.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you, and thank you so much.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
And we'll be back next week with another edition of Canada Files.
The preceding program was made possible through the generous support of the 63 Foundation, as well as the following donors: Ted and Alice Kernahan, the Browning Watt Foundation, Mary Davey, David and Cheryl Carr, Jim and Sandra Pitbledo, Tony and Sherry Fell, Bryce and Nikki Douglas, Richard Wernham and Julia West, Charles and Marilyn Bailey, Michael McCain and family, Richard Pilasoff, Clench House Foundation, Kathy and George Dombrowski, and by the Central Canadian Public Television Association.